OCO and welcome to the Cherokee Phoenix Breakdown. I am Tyler Thomas, the executive editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, and I am honored to be joined for our roundtable discussion today by Tulsa People features editor and Cherokee Phoenix editorial board vice chairperson Tim Landis, as well as Osage News editor Shannon Shaw Duty and KOSU Indigenous Affairs reporter Allison Herrera. Our discussion will focus on the newly released film Killers of the Flower Moon. We will get our panelists' reactions to the film, whether they believe the story was told accurately, as well as what it means to have Native-focused films and TV projects hitting mainstream. All that and more as we dive into our discussion. But first, I want to thank our panelists for taking time out of their schedules to participate in this roundtable. Tim, Allison, Shannon, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Yeah, honored to be here as well.
So Killers of the Flower Moon hit theaters nationwide a little more than a week ago. The film topped the worldwide box office in its opening weekend, bringing in $44 million. The film, originally a book written by David Grann, tells the story of the Osage Nation people who were murdered for their oil rights and wealth in the 1920s Oklahoma era. The book was adapted for film and directed by Martin Scorsese. To begin our discussion, I'm just going to ask you to all kind of give your initial reactions to the film. Did you go into viewing the film in your journalist role, or as just a native wanting to see a native story portrayed on the silver screen? And Allison, we'll start with you.
Well, I went into the film, I think, with both. I really was excited to see how Martin Scorsese and his crew was going to adapt this film. I had heard a lot about it just from Shannon and from other people in the Osage community as I was doing reporting for In Trust and for some other stories. So I was really curious to see how they shaped the story and how they were really going to handle such a heavy topic that was put forth in the film. And I was also concerned about how Osage people were going to be represented in the film. But then watching the film, Shannon and I had the privilege of going to the Cannes Film Festival back in May to see it. And that experience is something that I will never forget. To see Osages and Native and a lot of other Native people come to the south of France to see this movie and to have this moment. It was really incredible to watch, to walk up the red carpet and see other Osages come down the red carpet in their regalia, in their traditional dress. And so for me, it was such an exciting moment as an Indigenous affairs reporter to just watch all that unfold. And so, that marked my experience, watching the film and then seeing it a couple of other times.
Okay. Shannon, what were your initial reactions?
Well, to be honest, I was kind of going through the motions at the time when I saw it in Cannes. I think looking back, now that I have a tiny bit of perspective, I was very overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed as a journalist. I'd never been to a film festival of that caliber. I was interviewing the stars, and I was very overwhelmed in preparing to interview them. I didn't know I was going to get to interview them prior to going to France, but then when I got there, they told me the lineup, so I was preparing for that as well. And then as an Osage woman, mother, granddaughter of a full-blood Osage woman who had a guardian, and also my father, his great-grandfather was murdered by Hale's associates with strychnine and left behind 6 children. All of these things were I don't know, it just weighed heavy on me the entire time. And I know I prayed before I went to see the film because I didn't know what it was going to be. I kind of felt sick going to the screening. It was all just it was all very surreal, a whirlwind, yet exciting and fun at the same time. And then seeing the film and the standing ovation and the way that the people reacted in the theater was overwhelming as well. I guess I didn't realize, as journalists, we're observers, and I didn't realize how much it meant to me that they liked it. And that kind of took me out of my journalist persona for a while, just appreciating that they felt honored to hear our story. They felt honored that the caliber of talent had, chosen to tell this story. And we have many stories within the nation, and I know that this is just one of them, of the reign of terror for the Osage people. But going into that film and then coming out was it was a life-changing moment for me. It really was. And I guess that's as best as I can explain it.
Yeah. Tim, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I am a lifelong Martin Scorsese fan. I have seen every movie multiple times, seen most of them in the theaters since the late 90s on. On top of that, I had read the book when it came out. I had worked in cultural tourism at Cherokee Nation for years, or with the tourism department and media relations. And I really immersed in tribal history, reading Dr. DeBoe's works the last couple of years and everything. So diving deep into tribal history, Oklahoma history, and everything. So going into this movie, watching it, it was an overwhelming experience. It was complicated because my love for Martin Scorsese, and then watching a movie filmed in my backyard with many of my friends and others working on this and showing local, sites and everything. So it was overwhelming and it was complicated because there was much to do. I follow entertainment press a lot, and there was much ado about the overhauling of the script and Osage culture and all that. So going into it, my expectations were through the roof on what this was going to show about Osage history and culture and everything. And from the we get Leonardo DiCaprio's character riding in on a train, and he hugs Robert De Niro, and you're shown this is a story about these guys and what they did to the Osage people. And that disappointed me. It's a 3.5 hour movie. Lily Gladstone carries it, but she didn't get a monologue. Like, there wasn't really a scene where Osage weren't involved with white people, and that bothered me. And I understand the filmmaking of, the pressures of the white man coming in and everything, but there was still a life being lived there by numerous people, and it could have been showcased better, I thought. So that's what really drove me crazy about this, was that there was an opportunity there to tell a better story about the Osage, and they didn't do that. But they did work, they did consult, they did bring in local and Indigenous, help to work on this film and everything. So that was very important. And it did bring a spotlight on the Osage Nation and on Oklahoma, which is important. So again, though, but complicated feelings overall. And I don't know when I'll watch it again.
Yeah. So I grew up in Oklahoma and went K through 12 here in the state, went to college here in the state. In addition to my journalism major, I had a minor in history. Not one class that I ever taken, high school, college, any history class, that this ever get talked about, this story, the Osage story. So to me, it was the first, I guess, exposing to that culture, that heritage, that history in that era. What were your thoughts, Shannon, in regards to the history of how the Osage's history, how it was told, it being put on front and center? Do you think it was shared accurately?
I think it was shared accurately. I do know I'm privy to conversations and well, I'm from Fairfax. I grew up there, where the film takes place, and I'm also of the Gray Horse District, and my son's the current drumkeeper right now. Let me just say that Fairfax, during my time in the 90s, and it was a pretty racist place. I'm not gonna lie. You know, and I'm really putting myself out here, just so you know, because I know there's gonna be Osages from Fairfax and Gray Horse that might see this or hear this. So I'm just gonna be honest. You know, a lot of our people married white people. It's a fact. I mean, I'm trying to think of a family in Gray Horse that just married Osages, and that's way back there. We're, our tribe only has, I think it's 8 full bloods left. Gray Horse is the smallest district of all 3, and it's, the Reign of Terror has no small part in that. You go to our cemetery and it's full of full blood Osages at young ages. Um, I wish there was a different story to tell. That during that time in Fairfax with William Hale involved, where the Osages were calling the shots, but it just wasn't that way. And I know that the late John Williams and Molly and Ernest's grandkids, and even Ernest's his white side of his family, they were all consulted for this film, and they were privy to special screenings, and so, I mean, while I can say I wish it was a different story, this is the one they told. And I know that if it hadn't been for Scorsese's compassion and sincerity and doing a good job with the Osage, none of those cultural scenes would be in there at all. You know, there were some Osages that were mad that there was a Osage wedding scene, because, there wouldn't be a traditional Osage wedding with a white man for an Osage woman. But I know that artistic liberties are taken, and that he wanted to showcase our beautiful wedding ceremonies just because it's pretty. And it also was a way for him to show De Niro's character, Hale, coming into our people and being involved, because he was. Mm-hmm. And they trusted him and they were friends. And even after the Reign of Terror and he was let go, he still visited, and he visited Osages. There were Osages that didn't believe he murdered anyone. So, I mean, it's a very complicated story, and it was a monumental task to tell it. And I know that they chose to focus on the villains, but in my mind, I want them to, because I want them to show what they did and how there was it's almost as if they were sociopaths, and I know that everyone has different takes on that, but I really appreciated that. But my favorite scenes, of course, are the cultural scenes. And the movie starts off with us burying our ways, which I don't know if the average moviegoer is going to know what was taking place there, even though the monologue, the dialogue is telling you that, Charlie Redcorn is the medicine man, and he's saying we're burying these ways because we have to get ready for the white man, etc. But I know that every Osage that sees that knows exactly what is happening in that scene. And it's almost so inside baseball that I was like, I guess I was so moved that Scorsese would include that, and to include that. And he could have only done that in that kind of way with Osage's input. So also, out of respect for the Osages that worked on the film that are from Gray Horse, I know they shared a lot of themselves in their personal stories from their ancestors. So like, I can't say I didn't like that, because to me, it's what they put forward. This is their story they put forward, and that is their piece of art. And we look at it, and it's a good one, because as we all know, art inspires conversation. And whether it's good or bad, the fact that we are talking about it is good. I think, all opinions are good as long as we're talking about it, because in my mind, the main mission was to tell everyone what happened. Whether you liked it or not, you're seeing it. And to me, that is the most important thing, is that people will know our history, that we were murdered. So that is, I forgot what your question was, but that's just where my mind went.
You nailed it.
Oh.
Tim, what was your thoughts on the accuracy and how the story or the history was put on the front and center for the public?
Well, and I want to back up just a second because you started this with the question about being raised in Oklahoma, being raised in the school system and everything. I was raised in Claremore. It is named after Chief Claremont, an Osage chief, and I had no clue like the full extent of that story. And I was raised in, a Cherokee community in the Cherokee Reservation with an Osage chief named Community. And all I knew was there was a battle on the hill between Claremore and Oologah at one point because I'd seen a sign. And then it took until on my own to learn about that history. And like I said, I read Dr. DeBoe's works and everything. And that, and then that's where I came to understand like why Osage's treaties and such were so different. In the movie, there's a part where Leonardo DiCaprio is just reading a book about the history of the Osage and everything, and he goes halfway with it. And he talks about how the Osage were different than the 5 civilized tribes. And all I wanted was one more sentence there to say that the Osage purchased that land from the Cherokee Nation because it changed everything. And I know it's a little bit of inside baseball, but when you come to talking about history and you're wanting to tell an accurate story, I felt like that sentence was important because it could open the door for people to go learn more, sure, but it actually told more of the story. The other thing that bothered me, and Shannon can maybe speak to this, but from all of my research and everything I can find, when oil was discovered in the Osage Reservation, Osage weren't wearing buckskins anymore. And I know that, again, literary license, the scene at the beginning where it shows Osage people dancing in oil and buckskins, to me, that rubbed me the wrong way. It felt bothersome. They're using that in marketing on posters and everything. But from everything I can find in all my research, Osage weren't dressing like that in 1896. So there was those little things that bothered me in the historical part of it. But overall, I mean, again, I'm glad that they took the opportunity to consult with the Osage Nation and get some of those little details correct. The prayer things at the water at sunrise and the way they dressed and the council house being around. Those little things that they did. They didn't just do the standard Hollywood stereotypes. So that is a major step. And for Scorsese to do that just adds more leverage to the fight that we're all waging when it comes to sharing our accurate stories and histories and cultures.
Allison, how about you?
Well, I had the opportunity to talk to Martin Scorsese just a little bit during this, like we had a little Sunday kind of like meet and greet that Apple had. And I got to sit down with him and I asked him some questions about, about the guardianship scene. Like there's that scene where she goes in. I mean, this is such a powerful scene to me. She goes in and she has to say her allotment number and say incompetent. And I just think, while you said, Tim, like she doesn't give a monologue, I think the way that her being and her presence was, to me, a monologue in and of itself, the way that she carried herself during that film. And I asked Scorsese about that. And he said, I said, do you think that audiences are going to be like, understand what that meant? And he said, I think that people need to look it up. I think people need to look more things up. And so while I heard your point about adding that one sentence in about that the Osage purchased the reservation from the Cherokee, I think to Shannon's point is that this movie is going to prompt people to ask more questions about this history and want to know want to know more about Osage history, want to know more about Oklahoma Indian Territory history. And I think, I wasn't raised here, but I've just, since I've started reporting here, it's been my passion and my goal and my lifelong work to understand the geography and the people and the history and the stories of this place. And I think to me, that's what I took away from this movie. That beginning scene is just so emotional, and you're right, Shannon, it was such insider baseball, but I think like anybody that was raised, in an Indigenous household, like understands some undercurrents of that story, and what that means. And another thing, I remember talking to a few Osages about, there was things that I caught when I saw the film a second time that I hadn't picked up on in the first time, which was, when Molly says to Anna, like, you are my wealth, like you like her sister is her wealth. And I really, that was such a tender part. And like, so, and then when they were sitting down at dinner and, she tells Ernest not to close the window because she wants to hear the storm. Wilson Pipestem, I saw a post from him that was something that his grandmother Rose said, and he relayed that to Scorsese when talking about the film. And I think those were things that I think, to Shannon's point, that because they came out in the film because he listened to people, because he attended that film and overhauled the script and like had those really precious moments that I think Indigenous people picked up on, and then hopefully non-Indigenous people can come in and like, oh, I want to know more about that. I want to know more about the guardianship system. And one thing I heard somebody tell me, like, sometimes like it didn't go far enough. We wanted more, more explanation about things, like one person said, I want them to show, like you said, Shannon, I want them to show people what they did to us. And, and I think that's a really important, that I think that comes across in the film.
Shannon, regarding your thoughts on the film, as a citizen of the Osage Nation, the leader of the Osage Nation's newspaper, what has been the tribal citizens' thoughts on this film from production to it now being released?
It's a mixed bag. In the beginning, there was a lot of trepidation, and not everyone got to be involved. And when everyone doesn't get to be involved, some people get upset because everybody wants a voice. So beginning and through the production, I think that the Osages that were involved were very pleased with how they were treated and respected, and the consultation process. We had different people that were appointed by Chief Standing Bear to be consultants, but there were also consultants appointed by recommendations from the Gray Horse District. And that I thought that was really cool. I mean, I haven't heard of that ever happening in any other big budget Hollywood film with natives. I mean, I don't know, but the reviews after, I think is taking. Okay, so let me just say this: when you're Osage and you watch this film, for my experience, the first time you see it, you are extremely distracted by all of the Osages you see in the film. Even if you're very distracted, and you are taken out of the film. Like the second time you see it, it's, then you start to marvel at the cinematography and the filmmaking that went into it, and you're just like, wow, this is really great. And then the third time you see it, everything blends away and you are watching it like a normal theater goer. I'm a lover of film. I always have been. I also follow entertainment media, not for my job, but just because I love it. But it took me a few times to see this and to get the same reaction as my neighbor. You know what I mean? Like my non-Osage neighbor, they see it for the first time as something brand new, where I was literally in the film and I'm very close to the story. And I'm also, a tribal member. I mean, it's very hard. I think it's very hard for Osages to have an objective opinion about the film because we're just too close to the story. But so I think we all wished it was this or that, or maybe it could have been this or it could have been that. But I mean, I think it's pretty fantastic how it ended up.
And that's a good point.
A lot of community Osages feel the same way.
Yeah, and just listening to you speak, and then kind of my thoughts on it was like I tried to place myself as if it was, the Trail of Tears story being told, or the what happened once they got here and the assassinations that unfolded from the treaty party and all that for Cherokee history, and how it would be different for Cherokees viewing that than anyone else. So I think that's a very good perspective and thought on that, as far as how you kind of get taken out whenever you do see that, because you are Osage and you come at it from a different perspective. Allison, you've covered this from production to the release of this film. What has that process been like for you personally? If you could have one call to action for Indian country in this new paradigm of storytelling, where native history, native culture is being put in the forefront, what would that be?
Wow, a call to action. I would say I would say listen to people. Like that's the biggest, to me, that's the most important thing. Like if you're a non-native coming into a community that is a native community to tell a story that isn't yours. Rachel Adams-Heard and she is the reporter and host for In Trust. And we talked about this, if you're going to tell a personal story like this, I think it's important to listen to people. I mean, that sounds really easy, but it sounds very simple, but oftentimes it is just so not done. And not being Osage, I take that into consideration all the time when I am talking to Osage people. It's important for me to be able to get people to trust me, and that's not hard. That's not easy, especially for Osages, for media to come in on the outside. I think one of the things I noticed in reporting In Trust and just doing the reporting before the movie was released, just looking at how the media treated Osages back in the 1920s and into the 1930s, like reading these articles about Osage wealth and oil was so, it was like, okay, obviously, like, I'm not going to, use these racist tropes, but like, how can I avoid, I see other media using, like, falling into those same pitfalls, like, maybe not saying like the word squaw, but also it's just a lens. It's just like a way, to cover, like, even like, I hate saying, like some of the wealthiest people in the world, like, to me, it's like, it harkens back to the 1920s. I was really aware of that, and really aware of like practicing trauma-informed reporting. I think that's a really important aspect to doing to reporting on these stories, especially with In Trust. Making sure that you are talking to descendants, like you're not just reporting this story and somebody's going to find out, oh, that's my great grandmother, or that's an aunt, or that's a relative of mine that you're talking about, and making sure that you're doing your due diligence and not like, oh, I've got this like really great story about, exploitation that happened. And because that's just so salacious, and it doesn't really have it's not a meaningful story if you don't involve people or listen to people, or, make sure that you're informing people like, hey, are you okay with me talking about your relative? Like what other, and making sure that there's like, that it's not a story that's told in the past. And I think, I did a story about Fairfax, where Shannon is from. And I wanted to make sure that people knew, like, that place isn't, it's like, it's not just, people want to revive that town. They want to create something that doesn't just focus on the murders. And I felt like that was a really important story to tell. So.
Tim, every tribe has a story in history, maybe not exactly like the Osage, but similarly tragic in their relations to the, white neighbors, U.S. federal government, all that. What are your thoughts regarding that this book was written by a non-native and the movie was directed by a non-native? Do you see a future where tribes and tribal citizens are owning the telling of that history so that it is more accurate, more representative of the real history of our ancestors?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, Killers of the Flower Moon wouldn't exist without the work of like the books, Many Deaths of Sybil Bolton, and books before that came. There was some reporting and some writing done before that. So, and I think David Grann acknowledges that work. That another journalist, and Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong, was it David McAuliffe? Was that his name that
It was
wrote?
Dennis McAuliffe.
Dennis McCall. Okay, yeah. It's been a minute since I've read that book, but that book I would recommend to anyone. It's a different take on it. It was written in a different time period. It was written 30, 40 years ago. But that's what kind of, I think, cracked open the door for some outside of the area to learn about it. In terms of David Grann doing it, this month we have a white journalist who wrote an article for us, a feature on reservation exploration and learning more about the tribes through their cultural tourism programs and such. I thought long and hard about that. I'm, as the editor, being Cherokee, I was overseeing it so I could still go in and make corrections and stuff. So I was okay with that. So at times I'm okay with people doing that. But what we need is an opportunity for Native voices to tell Native stories. We can't stop someone like David Grann from writing it. And it's a great book. It's been on the Oklahoma bestsellers list. Of course, it focuses on really the creation of the FBI and that angle of it. But it did open doors to discussions and opportunities for a movie like this to be made and released and put a bigger spotlight on it. Not Native, but Beth Macy, who wrote Dope Sick. She came to town a while back and talked about how when she wrote Dope Sick, people read it. It was journalism. Some people read it. When it became a show on Hulu, it really opened up the conversations on the opioid epidemic, and it changed everything. And she acknowledged that. And I think David Grann would probably say the same thing about Scorsese doing this movie. It launched it to a whole new level for people to open up discussions. What I hope for is that people take the next step and go read the books and investigate the history and read the journalism coming out of Osage News, read the true accounts of what happened. And that's the same for every tribe. We all have trauma. We all have terrifying stories that will be told by some people. I mean, I still dread the day when a forced removal miniseries comes out that's not made by Sterling Harjo or made by Jesse McEver or someone else who is Native. That will probably happen at some point. But it's very important that we have Natives telling Native stories and having those opportunities. There's just because Killers of the Flower Moon was made doesn't mean an Osage filmmaker can't go tell their own version of this story and tell it from their angle. And I really hope to see that happen soon. A little inside baseball on our part, we have a Cherokee film office that is operating. Last year, I wrote a feature script on the creation of the state of Oklahoma and everything, so I was deep into stuff. We have a Cherokee screenwriters group that we do. We have monthly meetings and such and talk and just get together and stuff. And that creates opportunities. And I think something like with Killers of the Flower Moon, what it did was it made non-Native filmmakers pay more attention. And what Jen Lauren and her office is doing is they work with non-Native filmmakers to make sure that they can consult and get more accurate histories and such. And an example I have is that myself and another writer, we were sent a story treatment written by a man in LA who had won a CAN award, and he wanted to do a story about the Cherokees and the land runs and basic, the assimilation and everything. He wanted to tell his story, but the treatment he wrote was about 1955, stereotypical as you can imagine. But so what I was able to do is go through and tear apart his story treatment line by line and tell him that alcohol was not allowed in Indian Territory, so there were no saloons. It's those little things that are important to tell the story of what was going on. There wasn't one land run, there were 5. So by the time of that final one, like everybody in this area knew what was happening. And so I basically destroyed this movie project from happening. And I feel good about that because it would have been a completely inaccurate display or telling of Oklahoma history, tribal history, everything. And we just can't have that anymore. And I think that, you asked about call to action. That's my deal is read as much as you can, visit the sites, go to the museums and talk to the citizens of the tribes who work there and learn the stories. Don't wait or try to, just build it off of what Hollywood has told you. Don't go into that world. There are so many stories out there that need to be told and need to be read. Dr. DeBow is one of the best writers out there, when she was doing it. And without her work, we would be completely lost, I think, in terms of tribal history and Oklahoma history and all she was able to document. So, yes, so there is still plenty of work to be done. Most importantly, let Natives tell Native stories.
Before we end our discussion today, I want to give each of you a chance to add anything to it that we might may have not touched on today. And Allison, I'll start with you.
I mean, I'm just gonna go off the call to action thing again. I think the call to action is yes. Listen and involve Native people in Native stories and let Native people tell their own story. And also, one thing I remember talking to Shannon about is one thing that came out of the movie is all of these Osage people got their SAG card, they want to work in production and want to make their own movies and want to do, and I think that is, to me, that is so exciting to watch, young people want to work in this industry, want to write scripts, want to be a journalist, want to, want to tell these stories. And I think, to me, that is the call to action, is like, read more, and get involved. I think that's really important, because if you don't, then what is there? Then you're gonna complain about somebody else doing it. So get involved, write your own script, try to, I think that's really important. So, and I would say on the legislative side, where I call for action in general, is to pass legislation to return Osage head rights. That's my main call to action. That's what I hope this film inspires people to do.
Shannon.
I like the legislation return. That's the head right return. And that's a complicated topic in itself. Who does it go back to? Does it go back to the tribe, or does it go back to the original families? So I think my call to action is going to be more personal. It's going to be more local. So I'm doing a call to action for my tribal people, for my leaders, to develop an office that can help Osages research their land allotments and research their head rights. We have the money. And I think that if we had an office of researchers dedicated to helping Osages find out this history, I think it would make returning our head rights that much easier.
Tim, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just second, third what they're saying. Get to understand your history, spend time researching it. If you are Native, you have a rich history to learn that wasn't taught to you in no shape, means, or way, and it's continuing to be suppressed. So learn, educate yourself, talk to your relatives, talk to your elders. If you're non-Native, it's okay to ask questions and get educated. Learn things like why you don't ask someone how much Indian they are. Like, let's get past those things, And when it comes to legislative stuff, remind your congressmen and women how important it is that you know your tribal history and tribal relations and how important they are to the state of Oklahoma. There continues to be a fight between the state and the tribes that is reckless, it's ignorant, it's dumb. We need to work together and continue, because this state was made by the tribes and it continues to grow and be more powerful because of the tribes. So, let's all work together, contact your legislators, tell them how important our tribes are to the state, and research, read, and write, and share your art. And let's continue to remind people why we're here and that we're never going away.
Absolutely. With that, our roundtable discussion will conclude. I want to thank Tim, Shannon, and Allison for joining me today as we discuss the newly released film, Killers of the Flower Moon. I also want to thank our audience for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel to know when new videos are posted. Also, follow us on our social media platforms to stay up to date on the latest happenings in the Cherokee Nation and in Indian country. And go out there and follow Osage News too, because I'm sure they're doing the best content regarding this film that there is out there. So give Shannon and them a follow. Shannon, do y'all have subscriptions to the paper?
Yes, we do.
All right. Go on their website. Can you subscribe on your website?
No, they got to email me.
Okay. What's your email if they want to subscribe to your newspaper?
They can sign up for email updates. That's about it.
Okay. Well, do that. Do whatever you need to do to stay informed. And Osage News is one of the best ways to do it. And follow us on all of our social media platforms for the Cherokee Phoenix. As I said, to stay up to date on the latest happenings in the Cherokee Nation and Indian country. Allison, You can follow her on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, all that, I believe, right?
Yeah, and you can also sign up for daily news updates from KOSU.org if you want to as well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Tim, how do they follow your content?
Instagram, really, I got off of Twitter/X a couple of years ago and haven't joined the Threads world yet, but Tim Landis JR on Instagram. Tulsa People, we continue to do as much coverage as we can. I try to write about as much Native content as I can. I'm spending a lot of time with the Muskogee Nation, so I've got to get more Osage content in there. So help me out, Shannon. Well, no, everybody for letting me be a part of this and for sharing in this roundtable.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Wait, thank you.